This is TWiT.
Do you remember what your first assignment was when you came down from Washington?
Yes, I was hired in as the application software department. There wasn't one.
And this is for an Apple II at this time.
Apple thought, well, we make hardware, and software is sort of a necessary evil to make the hardware useful. And so I collected cassette tapes. We didn't have a floppy disk back then. I collected cassette tapes of software that users had made and
in Apple
put
Basic,
them together.
Probably, right?
Either in Integer Basic or
Basic.
later in AppleSoft Basic, the Microsoft's Basic that had strings and floating point. And I would assemble them into sort of mixtapes that would be sent out to all the clubs so that they could share.
I remember that. You'd go to the user group and they'd have tables with the cassettes or and later floppies that, you know,
one of the things I learned from that was because the I/O game paddles weren't on, not everybody had them, you couldn't write software that counted on them. So later, when we went to do the Lisa, that's why I insisted that the mouse be in the box so we could count on it. So when you do a graphics editor, we'd know that they had a pointing device. And that was a little bit of a hard sell, but I convinced, I think Tom Whitney was the one who finally had to make the call on that.
Yeah.
But so that was the first thing I did. Then I said, well, we need to get a better development environment. So Woz was a hacker, a hacker's hacker, a great hacker, but he wasn't a disciplined, structured programming guy.
He didn't have a computer science background either, right? He was a hardware
so I said
guy.
we should port the UCSD Pascal system onto the Apple II. And my manager, Roy Martin, said, no, we don't need that. And I went over his head to Steve. And Steve said, oh, I think our users are quite happy with BASIC and assembly language, the 6502 assembly. And I was passionate about it. He said, well, since you're so passionate about it, I'll give you 2 weeks to convince me otherwise. So I was on a plane that afternoon down to UC San Diego. I never bothered to get a hotel because I just worked and slept on the lab benches. At one point, and UCSD had done most of the hard work. They had made a 6502 interpreter.
It was a P system, right?
Yeah. So, it was, and they'd made a 6502P code interpreter. So the port was relatively easy. What I really had to do is plug in graphics, which was a little bit tough because Apple II's graphics were a little bit screwed up.
There were Woz graphics.
High-res graphics had 7 pixels in a row or in a byte, and then the high bit in that byte shifts these all over a half. Oh, great. And then the next scan line was somewhere else completely in memory.
This is Woz saving chips, getting one fewer chip on the board, basically.
Well, he was very clever, but sometimes cleverness costs. And the other thing I had to do is plug in the disk routines. Now, the UCSD Pascal system was big enough that it wasn't going to fit well on our 13-sector floppy disks. These are 5 1/4-inch disks. And Woz had come up with a new way to pack the data called 16-sector.
Yeah.
And so he came down to UCSD to help me install the 16-sector disk routines. We were going to use the 16-sector for the release of the Pascal. And I watched him typing. And he would type not in assembly and then assemble it. He would type in hex, object code, and then disassemble to check himself. But
he was writing machine language.
Yeah. So he would type. And I asked him, what was the pause? He says, forward branch 7 instructions. And he had to compute how many instructions there were and how many bytes each would take so he'd know what the offset was. So instead of going back and patching the offset, he would just type it right the first time. And then he would disassemble it. Well, one of my jobs then was to take his disassemble and comment it and try to put English language comments, what is he doing? And I did, and he was amazed. He said, I can't believe you understood my 16-sector disk packing, my nibble coding. He says, did I get it right?
Wow.
So that was the first actual source code listing of the 16-sector disk routines that had comments in it.
And it was reverse assembled.
Yeah.